In this video, we will build horizontal scrolling using the mouse wheel. When developing an application, you may need sections that scroll horizontally using a mouse wheel. This could be left or right scrolling. We will build both left and right scrolling as well as reverse scrolling. In the same way, the first row moves to the left side and the second row moves to the right side. Let's see how to do it. I'm going to open the Visual Studio Code, and here I'm going to create a folder scroll and create two files inside it. First is index.html, which contains a simple HTML file snippet, and then we have a style.css. We don't have anything inside this style.css. So inside this file, I'm going to first link the style.css, and inside this body here, I'm going to create a division tag with the class scroll container. When I press enter, this will create a division tag with the class scroll container, and then I'm going to specify ID here, which is scroll container. You can access this division tag with the class or with the ID. That's upon you. Now here we create two division tags. First is for scroll row, and I'm going to duplicate this, and to both this division tag I'm going to specify ID. This is the row 1 and this is the ID with row 2. First row is for left scrolling and second row is for right scrolling. So let me just start this development server. So I'm going to open this HTML file in the development server. So as you can see, we don't have anything inside this index file. Let me toggle this just like this. If I put something here, then I'm going to get that result right inside this page. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to style this HTML back to the style.css. Now inside the style.css, I'm going to first select all the HTML elements and then specify box sizing, border box, then margin is going to be 0, and then padding is going to be 0. After that, I'm going to specify body element, and for the body, I'm going to specify font family, Arial, and the fallback value is going to be sans serif, and then the background color. I'm going to put a dark background color to this body. So I'm going to put here a hex color of the dark background. Just out of that, here I'm going to specify color to all the text. So I'm going to choose a light color to all my text. So I'm going to put here a hex value with the light color, just like this. And then the important property is overflow X, which is going to prevent the horizontal scrolling. So we pass here overflow X hidden. Just out of that, we select the scroll container. So if you're back to the index.html, here you can see we have a scroll container. I'm going to copy it, and now we use this class. And inside this class here, we first say display flex, then we specify flex direction, which is column, and align item is going to be center. Now just out of that, we add some padding. So padding is going to be 20 pixel, and height is going to be auto. Now once we finish with this scroll container, let's develop the row container. Let me save the changes. You will see this dark background because of this statement. Just out of that, here now I'm going to select the scroll row, this one. So I'm going to select it. Here I'm going to specify display flex, then overflow X is going to be auto. Now this is very important property because now we are enable the horizontal scrolling with this statement. Then we add white space, which is going to be no wrap, and then we say margin bottom, which is going to be 0. Now this will remove the space between rows. Then we add width is going to be 100%, and scroll bar width is going to be none. Just out of that, I'm going to save the changes. You're not going to get anything here because we did not added any content inside this division tag. We'll do that later. I'm going to select both this division tag with the class scroll row, and then add here WebKit scroll bar, which is going to be display none. What this is going to do is this is going to specify display none to the scroll bar for all the browsers, for Chrome, Safari, and Opera. Now everything is ready, and now it's time to create the JavaScript file for this project. Now instead of adding all the images inside this division tag manually, I'm going to use JavaScript image API and put all the images inside this div using JavaScript. So here I'm going to create a new file called script.js, And first link this file. So right down here, I'm going to say script, and we have to import this file using source script.js. Save the changes, back to the script.js, and here we need to first select both the division tags. This one, as you know, we have an ID to this div, row 1 and row 2. I'm going to use this ID inside the JavaScript. So here we say constant row 1. So we say document dot get element by ID, and then we specify the exact ID, which is row 1. Make sure the ID need to be exactly the same. Now we have this row 1. Let me duplicate this, and this is going to be row 2. And then I'm going to change the variable name as well to row 2. Now just out of that, what I want to fetch all the images. So let me add here a comment and say fetch all images from image API. So right here, I'm going to create asynchronous function. So to create an asynchronous function, you need to start with async function and then specify the function name. So I'm going to specify function name fetch images. And then inside this function, I'm going to fetch the images from Pixel API. So you have to just search for Pixel API, and then you will find this link, free images and video API. You have to first log in and get your API key. So you have to log in first, and here when you click on this your API key, just copy it and use it in your application. Now for some security reason, I'm going to blur this section because you have to use your own API key. Now once you get your API key, you have to put that inside a dedicated separate file. So inside this project here, I'm going to create a new file and specify file name config.js, and here I'm going to create a variable constant. Variable name is pixel access key, and then I'm going to put my key here inside a single quote. You have to put your API key. I'm going to put my API key, and then I'm going to say here export default, and then specify the pixel access key. So I'm simply going to export this variable. Let me save this file and close this file. Just out of that, you have to import this file right inside this script.js. So we're simply going to say here import pixel access key, and we get that from ./ and then specify config.js file. We specify this file. Now when you save the changes, if you open your console, you'll get an error message. Cannot use import statement outside a module. To solve this error, you have to back to your index.html, and here you have to specify a type which is module. You need to inform HTML we are importing something inside the JavaScript. So we need to specify that right here. Save this file, back to the project, and you can see we don't have that error here. Now just out of that, in the script right here, let me fetch all the images from the API. So right inside this function here, we first say constant promises. I'm using promises to get all the images right inside this array. So we create a variable promises and specify that an empty array, and we get all the images using a for loop. Because I don't want a single image, I want multiple images in the array. So we can pass that images to this division tag. So inside the script here, we say for loop, and inside this for loop, we say let I is equal to 0, and then I is going to be less than 10. And then I'm going to specify here I plus plus. And then right inside this for loop here, I'm going to just print this I variable. So console.log is going to be this I variable. Let me show you the result first. So let me save the changes. Now let me just call these images, this function, save this file, open the console, and you can see 0 to 9 number inside this console. Now instead of this 10 here, let me create a variable. So we can change this variable anytime. So let me just create here a variable constant image count per row. So how many images you want per row? So you specify that count number right here. So I want 10 images per row. So I pass here 10, and I pass that variable name just right here. So anytime if you want to increase your images per row, then you can increase this variable. Now instead of console.log, I'm going to get the images from the pixel API. So to get the images, I need the pixel API URL. So I'm going to just create here a constant variable, constant URL is equal to, and in the single quote, here I'm going to say https://api.pixels.com. And from here, you can get all your images. So you first specify the v1, the version 1, then specify here search and your query. Now to this query variable, I'm going to pass the type of images I want from the API. So let's suppose from this query parameter, I want nature images. Then I'm going to specify here equal to nature. So this API is going to return all the nature images to this variable. So instead of hard coding the value, I'm going to create here a variable and pass that variable right here, query, and then pass that parameter to this query. So whenever you call this function, you have to pass this query. To pass this variable, you have to wrap this URL inside a backtick. So let me just grab this, get rid of this single quote, use a backtick, and then paste it again. And then here, after this equal to sign, here we pass a $sign. Inside an object, we can pass a variable. So we pass this variable here. Now just out of that, we add here ampersand and say per page 1 is equal to 1. And then again, we add ampersand page is equal to, and now you have to specify here a random number. So instead of selecting an image with their ID 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to use a random number function and import images randomly instead of using a same image every time. So instead of using a same image every time, here I'm going to use a floor math random function. So this is going to generate all the images randomly. So whenever you refresh your browser, that will generate the images randomly. So here I'm going to pass $sign, and then in the object, here we pass math.floor. We call a math method floor, and inside that we call math.random. And to this random, we just multiply 100. So this will just generate random number from 0 to 100. Now what I want to generate this number from 1 to 100. So just after this 100, here we pass a plus sign and then pass 1. Once this is done, just pass here semicolon. Just out of that, here I'm going to call this API. So here I'm going to say promises dot push. I'm going to use this variable and I'm going to push all the images inside this array. So I'm going to say promises dot push, and in this function here we call fetch. Fetch is a function used to make a request. So here we first pass the URL, this variable, and then the authorization header. So in the object, here we say headers colon, and then we have to pass here authorization, and then to this authorization you have to pass your API key, this one. So we copy this and pass that just right here. Now this is going to return an error because we have to wrap this inside an object. So we grab it, put this inside just like this, put this inside an object. So now to the header we pass an object with the authorization key, and the value is going to be the API key value. Now once you've done that, just press enter, and on the next line we call then, and here we say response. If we have a response from this API, then the response should be converted into JSON format just like this. Let me show you what do we have inside this promises variable. So just after this for loop, here I'm going to say console.log promises, this variable, and then you have to pass this query inside these fetch images. So just for now, I'm going to say here city. I want all the images of city. So here I'm going to press save, and this is going to return an error message that promises.push then is not a function. I'm going to get this error right here, then is not a function. This is because I closed these promises right here. You can notice So instead of closing this, we have to close this right after this done. So you have to get rid of this just like this and close that right here. Now you can notice this fetch function is closed right here. So we have to wrap this fetch inside this push method. So now if I save the changes, I'm going to get the result. I'm going to get all the promises inside this variable. Now you can see we have a fulfilled promise and we get the object right here. We get next page, the page and per page. And inside these photos, we have all our images. We can get the source of the image, the URL, the width, ID, and all the properties with this object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to access this photos property, access the first index, the 0 index, and then call the source, this one. And from the source, I'm going to use this large property to access the large image from this API. Now, just after that, what I have to do is you have to create a then function again, just after this then. But keep in mind, you have to wrap the then function inside this push. So just after this bracket, right here, you have to say dot then, and then I'm going to say data, and I'm going to just pass here data dot photos, call this property photos, this one, and then to this photos property, I'm going to get the first index, this 0 index, and to the 0 index, we have this source. So to grab the source, just out of the 0 index, here we pass src, the source, and from the source, I'm going to grab this large. So we pass here dot large. Now when I save the changes, I'm going to get the same result, but just the image URL. Now just out of that, once you have your images inside these promises, I'm going to call the catch, and if we have error inside this API, so let's suppose if I'm not able to get the image URL, then I have to specify here some error as well. So for that, I'm using a placeholder of the image. So at the top here I'm going to say constant placeholder image is equal to, and then specify here an API placeholder URL, just like this. So I'm going to pass here a URL of the placeholder and put that variable right here. So now if I'm not able to get images URL, then I'm going to put this placeholder instead of that image. And then just after that, at the end, just after this for loop, instead of console.log, now I'm going to say constant image URLs is equal to call await, then call promise dot all, and then specify the promises variable, this one. And now from here, I'm going to return the image URLs. So now if I console.log this, save the changes, I'm going to get all the images inside this array. You can notice inside a single array, I'm going to get all my images. So once we get the URL of all the images, let me use this URL and put that inside an image tag. So inside this index.html here, I'm going to create here an image tag, and to the source, we specify all these URLs. So instead of using HTML, I'm using JavaScript to import all the images. So get rid of this image tag right from here, save this file. I'm not going to create image using HTML. I'm going to use JavaScript for that. So just after this console, let me create a command and say create image tag function. And here I'm going to say function. The function name is create image item. And to this create image item, I'm going to specify the image URL. And now inside this image URL here, I'm going to say constant item is equal to document dot create element. Now we are going to create an element. So we pass here a property called create element. What we are going to create is, I'm going to first create a division tag, and inside that division tag, I'm going to put my images. So let me create a division tag, and then I'm going to specify the class names. So we first call the items, this variable, and to this variable, we specify the class names. So as you can see, we have this scroll row. Inside this, we first create a div, and to this div, specify class name, scroll item, and inside this div, I'm going to create the image tag with the source attribute. Let me create this div first and specify this class name. So inside this function here, we specify the class name, scroll item, this one. So at the top here, let me create this variable, constant scroll item class, just like this. And then I'm going to use this scroll item variable, this one right here. I'm going to put the predefined classes to this division tag. Just out of that, here I'm going to create an image tag. So to create the image tag, we need to say constant image is equal to document.create element, and inside this create element here we pass the image tag. Here in the single quote we specify img, the image tag, just like this. So this is going to create an image tag, and to this image tag we specify the image source. So we call img.source is equal to the image URL, this one. So we pass this image URL, then we call the image alt attribute, image alt attribute, and this is going to be image. Just out of that, here we call image on error. So if there is an error when creating this image, I'm going to call a function here. Now this function is going to say img.source, and to this source I'm going to specify the image placeholder, this one. So if there is an error, I'm going to place this placeholder variable, this one, just right here. And just after that, I'm going to say item.append child. So inside this div, I'm going to put this image tag. So I'm going to say append child, and then we pass the image tag, this variable. Just after that, I'm going to return the item as it is. Now this is going to create a division tag and an image inside it. Let me get it off this HTML markup and then back to the script.js. Just out of that, we need to put all these divs inside this division tag. So for that, let me create a function. So here we create a function to populate row with image. So we're simply going to say asynchronous. So we create the asynchronous function here, populate row, and then here we pass two parameters, row element and a query parameter. Now here I'm going to say constant image URL is equal to, we call await and then call the fetch function, this one. So we call all the images right down here, fetch images, and as you know we need query, so we pass this query parameter to this fetch images. Just after that, here I'm going to say image URLs dot for each, and for each URL, as you know, this function is going to return an array of URLs. We iterate over all that URLs using for each, and then I'm going to say here image URL, all here function just like this, and then say constant item is equal to create image item. We call this function create image items right down here, and then call this image URL. So we pass this image URL. So this is going to pass the URL, as you can see, to this image source. We pass this image URL using this function. So we pass all the fetch images URLs to the image tag, and then I'm going to call here row element, this variable dot append child, and we are going to append this item. That's it. Now just out of that, now the last thing we need is we need to specify this row element. Inside this row element, to specify this row 1 and row 2, where we want to insert all that images. So right down here we call the init. So we're simply going to say async function init, just like this, and then call try and catch. And just out of that, here inside this try, we call await populate row, this function. And as you know, to this function we need to specify where we need to populate all these images. So we need to insert all these images inside this row element inside this first row. So simply going to pass here populate row 1. So we pass the first row. Now just after that, once we insert all the images inside this first row, we also need to insert all the images inside the second row. So right down here, I'm going to duplicate this, and instead of row 1, now I'm going to say row 2. And as you know, to this populate row, we have a query parameter as well. You need to specify that as well. So here we pass a comma. First insert all the nature images inside the first row, and in the second row, we insert all the city images. And just for that, if there is an error inside this catch, I'm going to just console.error it. So we call console.error. In the single quote, we say error fetching initial images. And then we call the error and call this function init. Keep in mind, you have to call this function, and you can see I'm going to have the result like this. Now what I want to style these images. So back to the style.css. Let me select this scroll item class just like this, and specify first the minimum width, which is going to be 200 pixel, and height is going to be 150 pixel. So you can see we have all the images like this. Let me just zoom this a little bit. Now just after that, here we pass display flex, then align items is going to be center, then justify content is going to be center, and margin right is going to be 0. Just after that, here I'm going to pass overflow hidden. So I'm going to hide all the overflow content, and then specify border 2 pixel solid white. Save the changes. You can see we have a 2 pixel white border to all these images. And just after that, scroll down. Here I'm going to select the scroll images and select the image tag. First, I'm going to specify width is going to be 100% and height is going to be 100%. Just like this. Then specify object fit is going to be cover. And then I'm going to remove the border from the image. So specify border radius is going to be 0. That's it. Now we have the result something like this. Now what I want to add the scrolling effect to these images. I want to scroll this image when I use my mouse wheel. Now when I use my mouse wheel, I'm not able to scroll these images. I need to add this event to all these images and scroll all these images to the left side. So I'm going to back to the script. I'm going to first scroll down, and here before this init, I'm going to add a comment and say scrolling event, and then I'm going to create here a function with handle scroll function, and then specify here event parameter. And inside this handle scroll, here we first say event dot prevent default. Using this statement, we're going to prevent the default execution of this event, and then call the request animation frame function, and here inside it we call the callback function. And inside this we're simply going to say constant scroll amount is equal to event dot delta y. Now this property is going to double the amount of vertical scroll. Just out of this property, inside this function, here we say row 1 dot scroll by. In the object, here we pass left, call the scroll amount variable, this one, and then multiply that with 0.7. Now this value is completely upon you. Just for now, to understand how this scrolling work, I'm using these values, and then I'm going to pass here behavior, which is going to be smooth. Then I'm going to duplicate this statement, and then change this row 1 to row 2, and then change this value to 1.25. And now what you have to do is you have to call this function, this one, right inside your init. So just out of this catch, here we call window dot add event listener. Keep in mind, here I'm not using document because now the event is on this window. So we call window dot add event listener, and then here we call an event wheel. So when we scroll the wheel, I want to execute this function. So we call here handler function, which is this handle scroll. Then I'm going to pass here comma, say in the object passive false. If it is true, then this indicates that the function specified by the listener will never call this prevent default. So keep in mind you have to specify here false and then save all the changes. You can see when you save the changes, this will regenerate this app and going to return the different images, the random images from the API. So whenever you reload the browser, you will get a new images. And now when I scroll, we have a slow speed to the first row and high speed to the second row. This is because I use here a different multiplier. You have to just change these values and check your scrolling speed. Now what if you want to make the reverse scrolling? So if I use my scroll wheel, you can see both the rows moving on the same direction. What I want, when I use my mouse wheel, I want to move the first row on the right side and second row on the left side. So if you want to reverse this first row, you have to just simply specify here a minus sign, the negative sign. So this is going to reverse this first row. This will regenerate all the images. And now if I scroll, you can see we have a reverse scrolling. So I hope you understand how to create this amazing animation. If you find anything useful, make sure to press the like button, share this video with your friends, subscribe for more latest videos. That is all for now. I will see you in the next one.